All right, let's get this going here. High schools are posting their college lists. Don't be misled. An article by Ron Lieber of the New York Times. So Mr. Lieber starts out with this statement that in hundreds of places where the upper classes and those that aspire to place their children in those places, the list of colleges that high school seniors will attend is closely watched like the homecoming score or the police blotter. But what Mr. Lever says that with every passing year, these lists are becoming ever more misleading due to several factors. Number one, the underlying fundamental financial ambiguity of college lists. He makes the point that while with college costs often exceeding $300,000 and where discounts are legion, we can't know why any particular teenager attended one college over another. And so publishing these lists without any contact about who is paying what and why and how is very misleading and gives the wrong information. So he gives a very brief history is why did top schools, high schools start collecting these college lists? Well, at a time when schools were financed by bond financing, there was an expectation that they would keep statistics on where their students matriculated. But now, since most schools are financed by the banks and the banks don't care, that's not the reason. But the reason really is with continuing parental expectations of the lists. And if one school publishes it and there's an expectation, it's very hard for other schools to break away. So before I throw it open, Mark, I'm going to some of the reasons why he says that there's false meaning from these lists. Number one, over the course of the last couple decades, the number of elite spots to these top colleges has not changed, but there's a lot more people applying to them for a variety of reasons. Number two, and this is very interesting, grades are an increasingly meaningless predictor of getting in to one of these top colleges. As one counselor put it, colleges are not rewarding kids for grades. They are building communities. Quite a controversial statement. I'm sure we'll delve into our discussion. And then three, the college lists that these high schools put together don't consider money. And number four, they encourage ill advised comparisons. So let me stop here, Mark, and throw it open to you and see what you'd like to say about high schools publishing lists of where kids got into college.
Yeah, I've got a lot to say about that. And you're right. That was statement was, I totally know where that person's coming from. Let me make a comment on that statement you made where colleges do not reward grades just because that's too juicy to ignore. And then I'll get into the whole article. So here's completely where they're coming from. Something I often say, scores will knock you out, but they won't get you in. Right? That's all this person is saying. Grades will knock you out, but they won't get you in at the most selective schools. Why? Because there's just too many kids with high grades. So it ends up turning to other factors. That's all that she's really saying. At less selective schools, grades will get you in. But at more selective schools, if a school is taking 1,000 kids into their freshman class and they have, let's just say they have 30,000 applications and 25,000 of those 30,000 have really good grades, then, it's just not grades that they're going to turn to as the differentiator because too many people have high grades. That's all that she's saying. So let's get into this article. So first of all, half the country won't relate to this article, I think. What happens in private high school and in affluent suburbs, especially in hot spots of what we call the Acela corridor. Dave, you know what the Acela corridor is?
Yes, it's that train line that goes from Washington, D.C. all the way up to Boston.
Correct. It's a high-speed train that has 16 stops from D.C. to Boston. That's sort of the hot spot. I know this as someone who works with students all around the country where there's people feel a lot of pressure, whether they should or not, to try to get into a highly selective school in private schools in affluent suburbs. But there's other spots too, like the Bay Area. Certainly I see it in L.A., North Shore, Dave. I see it there in Chicago. But large swaths of the Midwest and South kind of won't relate to this. But there is this incredible pressure that schools feel to have this prestigious college list. And I have to say this because I never want to be a hypocrite. And I worked in boarding school admissions. So one of the things that was tough for us when we had to compete against schools that had more prestige, more name recognition, like Andover, Exeter, Choate, Deerfield, Hotchkiss, St. Paul's, Lawrenceville, schools like that. Even the local school, like Episcopal Academy. So why? Because parents looked at the college list, and while our college list would be really impressive by any means, we couldn't compete with those schools because, one, they had more students, and two, they were more academically selective. So what was my idea? Just to show why I can't be a hypocrite here, Dave. I said, okay, instead of listing how many kids we have that went to these 20 schools that people are fighting to get into, why don't we stop that process and just list all the schools we've gotten kids in the last 5 years, and we'll put in bold, multiple kids have attended these schools. And of course, all the names that anybody wanted to see were all in bold. And that was like my little marketing idea. And it was actually really effective because you looked at it, any school that people wanted to see was in bold. But why did I do that? Because I knew as an admission officer, the pressure we felt that people wanted to know the deliverables. And the deliverable was a ROI. And it was, if I invest this money, what are the end results? And one of the things I do disagree with in the article is he kind of makes it sound like, he said it would be great for this practice to go away. I don't disagree with him on that. I just disagree that it will never happen. And I'd like to waste a lot of time on things that will never happen, if that makes any sense. I agree with him. It would be good to throw it in the trash. I agree with him that it's false advertising. His main point, that's his main point, is throw it away. It's false advertising. It gives a false impression. It would almost be like this, Dave. You've got someone and they're going to use starting salaries to indicate whether or not they want to graduate from a particular school. So they notice that this school has $75,000 starting salary and some of them have $35,000. But what they don't know is that this particular college, let's just use this as an illustration, I'm making it up. So let's make it an engineering school. And let's say they have a huge partnership with the company, let's make it Boeing, that is routinely giving their grads $30,000 starting bonuses. And that $30,000 starting bonus is showing up in that original salary. So what it does is it completely skews the number because one has a $30,000 signing bonus in it compared to others that don't. And that's, I don't know if that illustration worked. I'm trying to work it over here, my friend.
I hear you.
No, it worked. You hear me? Okay,
yeah,
good.
Absolutely.
So that's what it is. It's apples and oranges. And the reason, and so that's why it's bogus. And that's one reason why I get really passionate about this topic is because I see that the public looks at college lists all the time. And, and they try to determine for these private schools, oh my goodness, look at all the people getting in these places. This must be an amazing school. I want to give my child that opportunity of having a better chance at getting in a school like that, so I'll enroll my kid there. Now, Lieber makes the point. He's a financial writer, so he tends to focus a lot on money. And one of the examples he gives is, one of the things you don't know is how many of these schools are targeting this private school because they're wealthy and intentionally admitting kids and giving them a tuition discount. In other words, let's say the school charges $50,000 for tuition, but they're really hoping to get $25,000. And so they target rich kids at this school and give them $10,000 to $15,000 discount so that they can get parents who will pay $40,000 in tuition. That happens a lot, especially with the schools that Jeff Selingo refers to as the buyers that buy kids, which is most schools. So he says, because of that, you don't know. But I want to take it a little deeper, Dave. Remember 2 to 3 months ago when we talked about you could really divide the whole world of college admissions into two groups, people who are just folks and people who have built-in lobbyists.
Yes. And
I want to give some attribute. You remember that? Yeah.
Yes,
I want to give some attribution now because it was bugging me. I couldn't remember who came up with that because it wasn't me. It was Harry Bald, who is famous for writing the book on writing the college application. It's a famous book subtitled The Key to Acceptance at the College of Your Choice that has had over 25 copies printed, 25 editions, and it's considered one of the best books on the college essay. So he's a former Ivy League admission officer. So it's not just anybody saying that. And I want to add that in because that's the reality. When people look at college lists and they're so impressed, what they don't know is, and this is much more true in affluent communities, how many people are coming in with hooks.
That's correct.
Or lobbyists. And this used to happen when in our school. Some years we'd have this college list that everybody was really, really raving about. Oh, my goodness, look, everybody would get in. And I can distinctly remember multiple times talking with the lead college counselor, and we would say, her name is Susan, and we would say, she would say, or I would say, she's like, Mark, if people knew like how many of those top kids came in with hooks, they wouldn't necessarily be as inspired by it, right? And so, what are hooks? What are for those of you who missed that episode? Well, Harry Bald in his books, he focuses on four things. He says development admits people who can, that can build the building, alumni, athletes, and underrepresented students of color. But I would say it's other things as well. It's a celebrity kids. In some places, it's the ability to be full pay. A full pay family can be treated very, very different than someone who needs financial aid. And in some cases, it can also be a student that's applying to a brand new major that a college is releasing, or a totally unsubscribed major. And they know that, gee, if we don't get more people interested in studying, linguistics, we might have to lay off faculty. And so if we see someone interested in linguistics, we'll put another asterisk beside them. So those things alone completely skew a college list. And when you're looking at affluent communities, so many people fall under the bucket of either development admit, alumni, athlete, student of color, celebrity kid, artistic kid, by the way, that's the other one I didn't mention. High artistic talent, full pay, and in some cases, unique undersubscribed major. And then the ability to apply early decision and not have to look at money. So those are my thoughts. So anything you want to say, Dave?
Well, yeah, and you brought out a great example a couple episodes back with let's take Lawrenceville, which is a master at recruiting all those different types of special classes. For number one, it's a feeder school to Princeton where many Princeton faculty actually have their kids. And we've mentioned that faculty kids is a huge hook. So they have that.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Dave, because I left faculty off the list. You're right.
That's right. And of course, University of Chicago, 1/3 of the kids are faculty member kids. So that's a huge hook. That's it's not an automatic admission, but it gives you a big step up. Secondly, with Lawrenceville, and we've mentioned it before, it's master at recruiting really good athletes, that to get into that school. So they have the football players, the lacrosse players, and so forth that are also very bright kids. But you add in bright kids, a great athlete, that's another hook. Also, because it's Lawrenceville, a good percentage of the kids are alumni to all these high-profile schools. So that's another hook. They also are quite aggressive with a select type of minority recruiting. So they have more than enough minorities that go there that are very qualified.
Well, what it is they have partnerships,
right,
with programs that look for the top students of color in the country, like Prep for Prep, and groom them from 6th to 8th grade.
Correct.
So they're bringing in the top 0.1% of kid into their pipeline. And it's even more simple than this. So what happens is these schools know that they've got to deliver an ROI, which is the college list, or people are not going to pay this amount of tuition. So what they do is they study what it is the colleges want, and they recruit it on the front end. And I'll tell you an actual story. And I'm not going to mention the name of the school, but I will tell you this. When it comes to particular boarding schools in the country, clearly some of the most prestigious schools would be Andover, Exeter, Choate, Hotchkiss, Deerfield, Lawrenceville, St. Paul's, Groton. Probably the 8 most prestigious boarding schools in the country. I was having a conversation with a good friend at one of those 8. I'm not going to mention which one. And because colleges are feeling so much more pressure to diversify where they recruit from. Back in the day, I could throw Milton Academy in there. I remember one Milton Academy parent that I got to know really well because she sent her kids to our school. She graduated from Milton, and 40 kids in her class went to Harvard her year, Dave. 40.
Wow.
Her year. So back in the day, these schools had handshake agreements with headmasters, and these schools would send more than 50% of their kids to these kinds of schools. But as schools are diversifying and more are realizing that we can't just favor these privileged enclaves and we need to reach out to more public schools, charter schools, it's gotten harder and harder and harder for these schools to get kids in, even with all these things that they do. So I was talking to a very seasoned admission officer at one of those 8 schools I mentioned, Dave, and he said to me, Mark, I'm not sure what we're going to do. This is one of the most prestigious schools in the country. He said, I'm not sure what we're going to do because we're not getting kids in like we used to. And that college list does not look like it used to. And are people going to continue to pay if they look at a college list and they're not blown away by the names they see on it? And so I say all that to say, like, lists are manicured, carefully crafted on the front end. People are recruited on the front end that they know they can place on the back end as part of their branding, so that you will say, wow, look at where kids can get in. And one of the things I get frustrated, because I do boarding school placement too. I've sent over 100 kids to boarding school. A lot of times Phillips Exeter, which arguably is the most prestigious of all of them, at least people think it is, it would be the equivalent of the Harvard if you had to pick the Harvard. I'll have lots of people that come to me and they'll say, Mark, I want Phillips Exeter. And I'll say, why? Look at their college list. And I have to break it down to them. And I have to tell them I've probably sent 8 or 9 kids to Phillips Exeter. And from my experience, it's actually harder to get into a real prestigious school from there because, first of all, they're turning valedictorians down. So, you got to go in there and kick butt, but then you got to be the absolute top of your class. So I just want to say college lists are incredibly misleading if you look at them and think these are my kids' chances, because are you one of the kids with the built-in lobbyist? And if you're not, that's what you're competing against. And you have to be much, much stronger than that kid to get in when they have a built-in lobbyist and you don't.
Yes, I have an analogy for you, a sports analogy.
I bet yours is better than mine.
Yes. It's a lot easier right now to be the MVP of the Cleveland Cavaliers than to go into the All-Star game and be the MVP there.
There you go. That's a good one. Or to be the MVP of the Cavaliers when LeBron was on the team.
Yeah.
That's another way of looking at it.
That's right.
A lot easier to be there with post LeBron versus concurrent with LeBron, right?
Or the MVP of the Bulls pre-Michael and post-Michael.
The point is, college lists really they're not a good way for you to predict what your chances are by looking at a school. They're just not, for the reasons that we mentioned. And I completely agree with Lieber. They're never going to go away because, look, Dave, let's use, honestly, you went at lab school. Did you ever take a look at where kids went to college before you enrolled at labs?
Oh, absolutely. I did. I mean, so it was de rigueur. But I had an understanding of how those lists were juiced, primarily the fact that,
Ooh, I like that word, juiced. That's a good one.
totally juiced, I mean, and everybody knew.
It's not talking about steroids.
Okay. I mean, the bottom line is lab school is a feeder school for University of Chicago because they educate so many of the professors' kids. So it was completely misleading in that sense. And then also, as you say, when you're already admitting kids who are at the top of their game in grades 7 to 8, who are already coming in with the requisite skill sets and the ambitions and the work ethic and whatever, you're just opening the gate and letting the sheep run towards the finish line.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that point, because not only are the kids coming in with built-in lobbyists, and the colleges recruit kids with have lobbyists because they know they can get them in these schools and that will continue to enhance their brand. The most selective schools are taking the top 1 or 2%.
That's right.
And if you're not the top 1 or 2%, you can't compare your expected outcomes, because people have a tendency to say, look, if that's where kids are getting in, then that's what's going to happen to me if I go there. And that's where the mistake is made. But let's put a bow on this, Dave. I think we've beat the dead horse, as you say.
Well, I just want to say one more thing. How many times you have mentioned how you've had kids who have gone to these highly selective schools, high schools, and done well, but haven't been at the top of their class. And even though they've done well in the college admissions process, you had often said that if they had gone to a little less selective of a high school, they could have been at the top of that pond and actually maybe perform just a little bit better. So be careful, parents, that you match up the school with your child's interests and abilities to ensure that they actually succeed in the environment in which they're in.
Yeah, because not only is it good for their self-confidence, but the little known secret is when it comes to highly selective schools, if you think they're going to take your B and turn it into an A, they don't do that. They still expect you to go in there and get grades of A and A minus. And when you're competing with the LeBrons, it's not that easy to do that. So you just have to know your child and match your child up for a right school. And don't make the mistake of thinking that both your kids need to go to the same school. That's one of the biggest mistakes I see kids make. different strokes for different folks, different schools for different kids.
Great. And one last point with the.
All right, man. You can't complain about the length of our podcast if you keep one last pointing me.
Well, I can talk. You just have to edit out all your stuff.
And leave yours in. Keep the important stuff in.
I know how we can cut this podcast down 50%.
Get rid of me.
That's right. But one last point. With the taking away of ACT and SATs, Mark, how many times have you mentioned now, especially in the places like the California school system, you have no room for error. A couple B's can knock you out of the game. So it is very important.
Well, now I have to say something about that because this is what stresses people out. You really do. All you have to do is adjust your mindset of what a good school is.
Correct.
There's plenty of great schools that would be happy to have straight B students, BC students, AB students. So you're fine. You just have to adjust your school list if that's your academic profile. I just want to make that really clear. And we try to highlight those every week in our college spotlights.
All right, now we're ready to take a bow. Take a bow.
Okay.
Put a bow.
You can bow anytime because you gave me a steak dinner this week. So you're the king for the week. King for the week. King for the week.